Good morning, and I am Shelley Yeo.
And I'm Heather McDonald.
So, welcome to the first Canadian Forum on Housing and Safe Communities for Women.
I'm just so thrilled to finally be here. This has been quite a process that's taken us over 4 years. We're excited to have over 500 delegates, exhibitors, and speakers gathered here to celebrate and participate. A little over 3.5 years ago, I received an email from Octopus Bookstore in Ottawa. There was an upcoming event by author Susan Scott, who wrote the book, All Our Sisters. That don't know the book, it's a story of women. It's a book of women's stories from across Canada that are written with a lot of respect and from the woman's voice. So I knew I needed to have Susan come to London to speak at the public library. When I finally managed to get a hold of her, I found out she lived in Calgary, and I thought, how am I going to do this? So I emailed the London Homeless Coalition, and they put me in touch with Shelley Yeo and Susan McPhail, two women that I was told would be very happy to be a part of this project. We got together, invited a few others, and tried to figure out how to get Susan here. The story goes much like the story of stone soup. Everyone pitched in a little money here, accommodations there, and a whole lot of hope and faith. We got her here. We kept her very busy for 3 days, as we planned to, once again. And at the end of all that, we said, the story needs to be louder. So we decided that we should have a national conference. And here we are, about to begin.
It is the women with lived experience of homelessness who have made this forum possible. Thank you so much. You have had the courage to tell your stories and the energy to participate on so many levels that we can't even begin to know how to express how grateful we are to all of you. So thank you again. And thank you, I would probably say thank you for the next 3 days. We hope that we will make you proud. If not, we'll have a list of recommendations at the end. Of course. I hope we'll be able to answer some of those questions from your initial conversations, those cafes that were set up, and that by the end of these 3 days we'll be moving forward. So this is just a beginning. I know that those other 3 years were a beginning too, but this is a beginning. The local steering and executive committees of 30 or so have come from a diverse community and sectors. Grassroots, participatory, feminist engagement takes time, and I must say this creative group stayed on task through thick and thin. Thank you for your commitment and your passion. Each and every one of you have contributed in a unique and individual way to get us here. I could tell wonderful stories about each and every one of you and your contribution to this event. It's indeed been a privilege. Could the committee members stand up? As you look around, you'll see some of these turquoise scarves, maybe a little bit different than this one. These are your hosts. So if you have any questions, please ask your host. There are quite a few of us in the crowd. All Our Sisters Forum would not have been able to engage a nation of women without the assistance of the National Advisory Committee. And could you please stand? Thank you to all those members who held the spirit and maintained the connections across the country over the past 1.5 years. It's indeed been a pleasure. And helping get people here. It's been a pleasure to meet you virtually and now finally in person. And I look forward to the next 3 days of being able to chat and get to know you. We heartily thank our local community and sponsors for their commitment to ensuring All Our Sisters is a success. In particular, thank you to the City of London and Sisters of St. Joseph for having the faith in us to pull this off. They really contributed a lot. I understand Irene Matheson is here. She's our NDP. congratulations. Thanks for being here. We'd like to draw your attention to the conference guide where you'll find agendas, room assignments, information about special projects. I'm sure some of you have seen this shoebox project. Please stop in and have a peek. I mean, I've looked at it several times already and I see something different every time. And also the traveling quilt, which is also up on display. These projects have taken on a life of their own, and you'll have an opportunity to see them showcased throughout the next 3 days. Women from across the country, by the way, have participated in these projects. So you'll note in the guide a special memoriam for our dear friend and colleague Laree Nordemir, and Darlene and Gloria have already honored her. Laree was there 3.5 years ago when we gathered to begin our conversations about this forum. She spent most of her adult life working for those whose lives are marginalized. Laree was determined in everything she did. She did not take no for an answer and was always so kind when she continued to push for what she wanted to hear. She could sit through a meeting listening intently and at the end be able to bring together the threads in a way that made so much sense and without making us feel really silly. One of our committee members reminded us of one of Laree's mottos, gentle pressure applied relentlessly. That was Laree. It was. Laree would take the time to write a nice note, email, letter, make a phone call to folks when she knew we were working hard, just to say thanks. Even when she was in the hospital conserving her strength, Laree wanted to know every detail of how the conference planning was going. She was so sincere and so true. This is the time when Laree would be probably patting us on the back, big smiles, making us feel better, and she probably would have something inspirational to say. 3 years ago, Laree invited us to meet at Rothholm Family Shelter when we were all talking in conversation about this. And it was a visioning session. And she often lit a candle at the beginning of each meeting to hold the space. And she did this for our meeting at that time. And lots of us have remembered that as we've been planning and bringing this forward. She has been with us throughout all of this time. And we want to thank you, Laree, for giving us so much. And we'd light this candle, we'll be lighting a candle for you, and dedicate this song in your memory. So, for Laree.
She could be our mother. So I brought my own handkerchief. And I'm not sharing, I've already had to use it. I'm totally blown away. I'm on the verge of losing it, but I want to see what happens over the next 3 days. I've been asked to read something, so I've smooshed together bits and pieces that I've written over the years, and I really wanted to tell you about Tanya, who gave us the title, All Our Sisters. Believe it or not, this all started for me in Winnipeg in January of 2004. That's where it all began. It was relentlessly cold, with the mercury hovering around -50, and that went on for weeks. But the cold outside was more than compensated for by the warmth in people's hearts. I was a freelance writer who had some crazy idea that a book needed to be written telling the world what it's like to be female and homeless in Canada. Armed with a small grant, some empty notebooks, and a bunch of my favourite pens, I flew into town ready to listen. It was the first stop of several and would set the tone for the unborn book and change my life forever. Surprisingly to me, Winnipeggers seemed to think the book was a very good idea, even though I had few credentials, no publisher, but an abundance of conviction that women's stories are important. Almost immediately, Tanya expressed interest in speaking with me, but she wanted to grill me with a few questions first. Was I an academic researcher? No. Good, she said. Stories change people's hearts, not statistics. It astonished Tanya when I told her that she, not me, was the expert, and that we needed to hear what she had to say about why she was in a shelter and what her life was like. It equally astonished her that anyone could be stupid enough to be writing a book and not have a title in mind. How can you do that? She asked. I felt like a child who just pumped her mother's cell phone into the bathtub to see what would happen. I don't know, but I am, I mumbled. Could you help me think of a title? Me? Do you really think I can help, she said, gratified I'd asked her to assist with something she considered to be so important. Well, it's obvious you know the territory way better than I do. That's true, said Tanya. 26-year-old Tanya was our nursing student, but at that time she was living in a Winnipeg shelter, waiting for a bed in the Women's Addictions Treatment Program. When she was in a good space, she did really well with her studies, getting high marks and loving the practical side of nursing. You mean I could help you, she said, both doubtful and pleased. The next day, she returned looking very excited. It was the only time I ever saw her look even remotely happy. I've got it, said Tanya, almost dancing. Tanya explained that women in her situation are treated like pariahs. At best, they aren't seen, and at worst, they are beaten and derided. She told me how she had woken up in hospital to hear a nurse saying, and this is really ironic, "Don't worry about her, she's just a crack whore." Insulted to the core, Tanya's resolve to become a nurse was further fortified by this remark, and it had also helped her shape her thoughts on the title of the book. We've got to show that we are part of society, just like everyone else, that we are connected to other people, she said, very conscious of the fact her own mother was at home that very minute looking after her little girl. Tanya's original title was a list of every conceivable female relative: grandmothers, nieces, daughters, mothers, aunts, sisters. Reluctantly, she agreed that it wouldn't fit on a book cover. And together, we boiled it down to All Our Sisters. We, or rather I, felt the word sister was all-embracing. Because Tanya wanted all the connotations that the words grandmother, mother, and daughter conjure up, she wasn't totally convinced that this abbreviated version would work, but she did understand the length problem. I was overjoyed with the title. Tanya, in one evening, had come up with something that expressed everything that was still jumbled up in my mind and therefore inexpressible. As a deal, I promised her that I would try it out on other women across the country, and if it didn't work for them, we could go back to the drawing board. In Edmonton, Vancouver, Toronto, and Ottawa, I'm so sorry that those people further east, my grant ran out in Ottawa. Women were so moved by Tanya's title that they would weep. Several even said, "You see us as sisters?" For a while, Tanya kept in touch. Then someone sent me a newspaper clipping in which she was referred to in very derogatory terms, certainly not as a sister. I was saddened, but continued to leave messages for her. After the Winnipeg book launch, Lynn Conover, and good morning, where are you? She's in the audience. Hi, Lynn. We went looking for Tanya to give her a copy of the book, but we couldn't find her. A few weeks later, goodness knows how she found me, Tanya sent an email saying, "You use my title? Cool. Please send me a copy," and then followed an address. Shortly afterwards, as you've heard, Heather MacDonald of the Public Library here invited me to speak in London, and the notion of sisterhood began to spread, with the especially strong link to my sister's place here. Yay! When the quest for a conference title began, Tanya's was so appropriate, it was irresistible. Once again, Lynn and I searched for Tanya to try and let her know what she has started, how her pebble in the pool has rippled across the nation, and we were unsuccessful. And then a couple of days ago, after I'd written this, Lynn actually did spot her. She wasn't able to speak to Tanya, but we now have a much better idea how to locate her and tell her what she started. So thank you, Tanya, from the bottom of my heart. And thank you to all the women who gave their stories, their expertise, their poems, and everything else, their pictures for the book. Also, I would like to thank all the women who have made this conference a reality and not a dream. The core group in London, the National Committee, but especially the women of lived experience, who have agreed to share their insights and their wisdom. If I were to name you all, we would be here for a very long time indeed. Over the years, I have worried that my gratitude sounds hollow, even self-serving. But All Our Sisters provides the best way to honour and to thank Tanya and all the other women of experience who have contributed to, or who are still contributing to change, who are toiling hard to make life good for all women in Canada. In the flurry of phone calls last week prior to the conference, a woman said something to the effect that conferences are excellent places to whip up good intentions and enthusiasm. The difficulty she said, is to sustain that. As individuals, we all do a lot. In fact, I know many of you perform miracles on a daily basis. But as a group, how much more can we do together? It's easy to break us down, to pit special needs against other special needs, especially when it comes to funding. But it's time Canada heard our united voices, because together we are strong. The best way we can honour Tanya and our other sisters, indeed honour all of us, is to make this forum the beginning, as Shelley has already said, and not the end, a real catalyst for change, so that the downtrodden shall rise up, and every woman in this country can live with dignity, and our children and grandchildren can be raised in a place where they can play in safety, with enough food to fill their bellies, and with love in their hearts. We don't have long together, but I am confident that by Wednesday afternoon, we can find a way, perhaps ways, to connect, to move forward, and to make ourselves heard above the din of self-serving politicians, the blare of consumerism, and the uproar of everyone's all-too-busy lives. We will have failed Tonya and all the other sisters more than ever if we miss this opportunity, but we know how to seize the day. I appeal to you all to honor our sisters and ourselves by walking together boldly into the future. I'm tempted to say it when no woman has gone before, but perhaps that's too corny. And united to work for the changes that we so desperately need. A national housing strategy, higher social assistance and minimum wages, less red tape, a national daycare program. You know all those needs way better than I do. We are all mighty as individuals, but as a host of women and men, we will be invincible. Now, let's roll up our sleeves and get down to work so that we can be the beginning of the end. We have so much expertise and experience up here on the platform. I think I should just quietly disappear and let them get on with it. We are going to start from the east and work our way west, and each panelist is going to give a little 5-minute presentation. But I will introduce them first, and maybe as I introduce you, you could stand up. So, starting with Nadine Lipton from Moncton. Nadine is the executive, sorry, I'm really having trouble with words, executive director of Blankets for Moncton. Which is an agency that she was telling me last night, it does all sorts of things. It just moves in to where it's needed, so it's far more than blankets. Nadine also has a special interest in mental health, and on top of this, she's a musician, playing the cello, the piano, and the violin, and she's also an artist. I'm keeping these introductions very short because I think the women have far more to say than I do. Nadine, would you like to do your 5-minute thing now, or would you like me to introduce everyone else first? Okay. So next up is Janet Moniz from Toronto, and she was cracking a joke at breakfast this morning. When she's thinking of her former husband, she actually calls herself Menace. That's her last name, but it's correctly pronounced Moniz, actually. Janet describes herself as a survivor, an advocate, and an activist. I would stress the last two, advocate and activist. If you go onto her website, www.survivorguide.ca, you'll just see exactly what she does and how many areas of activity she's involved in. And as Janet said, many survivors are just too scared or simply too fatigued to speak out. But not Janet. I think we're going to hear some amazing stuff from her today. Then we have Catherine Brock, our youth voice. In her 20s, Catherine has just finished a 2-year course at Fanshawe College here in London, and after talking to her for a while on the phone last week, if there's anyone in the area here in this room who has a job vacancy and is looking for a good person to fill that spot, social services, I would recommend Catherine. I would snap her up while the going's good. Then we're going all the way up to Yellowknife. Thank you, Monique, for coming all this way. After dealing with her addictions, Monique is now working in a Yellowknife shelter. And if that's not demanding enough, she's taking a degree through distance learning at McMaster University. Like all the women on this panel, Monique can only be described as an inspiration. And finally, we get to the West Coast with Paddy Delisle.
Oh.
Very conscious of the power of words, and I think she may be talking a bit more about that. Paddy describes herself as the co-founder of Red Willow Women's Centre in Duncan, BC. I can also tell you from trolling around on the internet that environmental issues are another big concern to her, as well as women's issues. Now I think the panel should take it away and I should shut up, so let's go for it, Nadine.
Good morning. Good morning.
Happy Mother's Day, everyone. If you're anything like me, you might have missed it. I missed it altogether yesterday, but I kept getting periodic multimedia messages from my daughter with pictures of herself playing with her hamster or watching movies. Or, this is how I'm spending Mother's Day, Mom. Anywho, I guess I always seem to do this in a big way. In 2007, when I decided to speak out about mental illness, I did so on national television. And followed that up with a speech to all the delegates and politicians in my area, so my parents were so pleased. So here I am at National Council talking about homelessness and domestic violence and mental health again. Normally when I get in front of a group of women, I introduce myself in such a way, like, I'm 36 years old, I'm a mother, sister, aunt, daughter. I grew up in a middle-class family. I have a degree in French music psychology, a degree in IT as well. I've had previous jobs where I was a technology consultant for New Brunswick and PEI, and then I moved down to the Caribbean where I was a creative director of an internet gambling company, and then to Europe where I assisted in a financial merger of securitizing mortgages in the European Union, which, you know, if I didn't do, actually, it wouldn't have fallen along with the US. So I was part of the all of the European Union economy, so I had that to brag about. I'm a webmaster. I was a translator from Dutch to English. I taught piano for 23 years, played in orchestras and ensembles, and also rock bands all around the world. So that's the speech I give most groups of women. However, the other side that you don't ever see or I never actually speak about is I don't feel 36. I feel very, very old, and also very, very young, because I feel like my life really hasn't started, but I've also known way too much pain and sorrow in my life. At the same time, I'm a single mother because I chose, unlike my mother did, to live in poverty instead of in abuse, because I figured poverty was way easier to get out of. I spent time in abuse women's shelters as a child and as an adult. I battled bipolar illness on a daily basis. I was a suicide risk until I was 25 years old. I escaped abuse while living in a foreign country and spent 2 months as a homeless woman in that country. My mother also suffers from mental illness and to this day pretends that she doesn't. Whenever she's paranoid or going through psychotic delusions, she tends to call the police on me, so I've had many police show up at my door and go, she said this. I'm like, well, sorry. She said something else last week. My daughter was kidnapped by her father when I was breastfeeding and she was 3 months old. I didn't get her back until she was 11 months old, so I spent my entire maternity leave by myself. Since then, I'm unable to work full-time because of my mental illness and the possibility of losing any amount of sleep in 2 or 3 days in a row, and then I can become sick again very quickly. So I live on disability assistance, which I'm always afraid of losing, because we have all these special rules where you're not allowed to earn money or do things or live with anybody, and the social workers in our area have the capacity to take away your entire check, so you quickly become homeless and evicted and criminalized I'm guessing across Canada, because that seems to be the rules across Canada. They are changing them in Quebec and Newfoundland, thank God. There's now a minimal amount of assistance that you have to get, no matter what the social worker says that you've done or haven't done, because we don't think that people should be homeless. And you shouldn't be able to choose as a social worker to make another woman homeless. So hopefully that power continues to be taken away from women with 1 degree and way too much power, and all across the country, not just in Quebec and Newfoundland, because every woman across Canada deserves that. Besides that, I spent 4 years sleeping, pretty much, because I was on really heavy antipsychotic and mood stabilizing drugs. And then finally in 2007, woke up because of a positive change in my medication, after explaining to my doctor that every night I scream and swear and yell and kick and fight during my sleep. it probably wasn't a really good resting period for me. And so he decided to change my medication, and the very next day it was like I could see clearly. I kept singing that song, I can see clearly now. So since then, I became an advocate about mental health and anti-stigmatized of all those things: mental health, illness, domestic violence, poverty, homelessness. And I also run a charity called Moncton for Moncton, as she mentioned. I serve on the boards of the YWCA, the Greater Moncton Homelessness Steering Committee, as well as I'm on the local advisory committee as a person with lived experience for the Mental Health Commission of Canada, where we're working on the At-Home Chez Soi project, which is a housing first project where we take people that are either homeless or housed precariously, like in rooming houses, or with their parents who are abusive or what have you, and put them into one-bedroom apartments and then give them supports where the people are visiting them every week to teach them how to cook and clean and dress and go to interviews or if they can't work, like many of them can't, then possibly volunteer or become some kind of a member of the community that they want to be for themselves, and give them the dignity of living in a secure house, in a safe place, in an environment where they're not marginalized, they're not put into slums like we've created all across Canada for our people that live in subsidized housing, the slum neighborhoods in the corner of every city. I don't know why anybody ever thought that that was a good idea. My clients, I love helping people, and it's become my passion, so I spend my time doing that. So my clients, last week I found somebody that would give one of my woman teeth. She's been living without teeth for 8 years, so I called a denturist. I called many programs actually for about 6 months, and then finally I called one denturist who said, call me back at the end of the weekend, and he called me actually, and then I called him back and he said, well, we will give your client teeth at our expense. And I said, okay. He said, we'll see you in 2 days. So she's halfway through her process of getting teeth. And it will change her life. She's been without teeth for 8 years. She's a grandmother, and she doesn't go anywhere besides my house and her grandchild's house and where she lives. And that's it. She's been homeless for 10 years as a couch surfer. This is the reality of women's homelessness in Canada. We are couch surfers. We stay at friends' houses and our mother's house or our daughter's house or our neighbor's house or wherever we can stay, to not actually stay on the street. And in many cases, the street is where a lot of women stay, but we are among the most invisible homeless population in the world. It's women in Canada.
Because that's a terrific comment.
Oh, the last thing I was going to say was we're also women. So I give people not just beds and car seats, I also give them craft supplies and yarn and books and toys, because that's, we want to make sure that we do our things and have our hobbies and treat our children well, and there's nobody just needs a bed and a couch. They need everything else to make their houses homes. Thank you.
Morning. I have something really funny to tell you, but anyway, last night I didn't sleep very well. Sometimes over the years when you're homeless, sleeping in a Hilton hotel with all the lovely amenities, and even a little fridge, I just thought it was so great. And so anyways, I couldn't sleep last night thinking about, wow, this is amazing. How far I've come, to be able to seek the pleasures of the Hilton Hotel in London. Anyways, I'll tell you a little bit about myself for those of you that don't know me. I am a survivor of domestic violence, but let me tell you, just because I left my abusive husband didn't mean that I was a full-fledged survivor. I was re-abused by the very system that's put in place to help women like myself. I come from 3 generations of abuse. Actually, my meme, who I never got to know, died at a very young age. The misfortune years ago, in the early 20s, women did not have shelters to go to. They usually went to see their mom or their family, but if you were an abused woman, blame was very much a part of the equation. My mother was also abused as well by my father. And it wasn't uncommon for us as young children to hide in our basement from him. We were from Windsor, Ontario, and sometimes my mom would go to Detroit, Michigan to flee my father's abuse, and she would not take us with her. That was very sad. I remember those times. I was only 5. And with my own abuse, I always said to myself that I'll never be like her. I'll never be like my meme. I'll be different. I'll meet the right man and I'll be happy. And I wasn't. Very sadly, I wasn't. I've been married twice. My first husband was abusive in a different way financially, but my second husband, who I brought all my children into this relationship with because I wanted a better home for them. It's always about women and wanting a better place for themselves, but also for their children as well. I saw all the red flags. I've gone for all the counseling. And sometimes when I reflect and I think back, when I used to walk along the street and I used to see people sitting on the ground, and they would have their hands out or looked, very poor. And I'd wanted so much to help them and give them money. But I never realized that one day I would be in that position myself. When I used to think about shelter, I was very frightened because sometimes we hear not so great stories about shelters, even though they're built for good reasons, to help women, to keep us safe, so that we don't have to be re-abused again. I thought about leaving so many times my abuser, but my children were there. And one day my daughter said to me, "Mommy, do you love me?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "If you love me, you need to take us from here. I don't feel so well anymore. Sleeping in the basement or sleeping in one bed or hiding from him. If you love me, please take us." And so upon that, I didn't want to call my mother because my mother always said to me, "Well, you made your bed and you lie in it." That's not uncommon for our mothers to say to us. And when I would look at my children, I would think, I need to build a better place for them, but I was so not well. I became very sick and disturbed and distraught. Eating too much or sleeping too much or possibly taking overdoses of pills because my life felt very broken. But I thought, well, I live in Canada, surely there's got to be good places and safe places to live. And the only place I could think of was my car. I used to live in my car a lot, quite a lot, when my husband wouldn't let me take my children. And I remember one day when I was in my car, and sometimes it was hot or cold, I didn't know sometimes the time of year when I was going to have to seek shelter in my car. And my son's little friends would say, "Oh, Lonnie, your mom's sleeping in her car and her feet are out the window." "Did you know your mom's sleeping in the car, Lonnie?" And sometimes my son would say, "Mom, if you must sleep in a car, please don't do it near the house. My friends make fun of me." So I thought, well, I just can't do this anymore. So I used to have a little trailer, and I loved that trailer. It was an old trailer, but I loved it. And I used to seek refuge in it sometimes, but the distance was so far for me to travel to work. So I thought, well, this is not safe, and I have to be away from my children, so I will live in my car again. And I used to actually, interestingly enough, live in the Y parking lot in the basement. And I used to go to the Y and shower, and used to have a nap room there, and I used to do all those things. And I'm sure that some of you can relate to these stories of what we have done, or what we've heard of how women, where they will go to what lengths to stay safe and to stay well. I did seek a shelter eventually and took my children, but not long after I was in the shelter, my husband abducted my son from me. He was only 11. And I never got him back. You know, even though we have a justice system here in Canada and the shelter workers, you know, were basically giving me all the rules of the day and the house cleaning chores and what I was supposed to cook and things like that I didn't really care about at the time. I just cared about my children, where they were going to go. And unfortunately, my daughter ended up in Children's Aid, and my son, my abusive husband, ended up getting custody of my son because I became not so well and wanted to end my broken life. It's been 12 years since I left my abusers, and interesting enough, I have a very long story, but I'll keep this very short because I know there's other very extremely interesting panelists that would like to speak as well. But my young brother, Tommy, who lives in Nashville, Tennessee, became my power of attorney because I couldn't write checks. I couldn't drive my car. I could hardly dress myself or even want to brush my teeth. But when he left the country, I became very alone and isolated. And sometimes it's not uncommon for women like myself to hook up again with another abuser, not realizing just because they didn't hit us or because they didn't call us the CUNT that they were somewhat better. 10 years ago, I met a gentleman and I was so distraught. My son wasn't with me and my daughter hated me. And my older son, who was in university at the time, didn't really want to have anything to do with me anymore. So I met a young man and became his partner, and he took care of me for 10 years. But now that I'm at a better place, with the counseling and the support, and saying, I love you, Janet. You're a good mother, and you were a good wife, and you were a good daughter, and this was not your fault. So wherever this journey takes me, because I will be homeless again on July 1st, and because it's his car, he might take the car back, so the car's not an option to stay in. And even though I have friends and some family members that have opened their doors to me, I choose not to do that. I will find my way. I know there's help out there. And I help so many other women, so why couldn't I help myself at this time? But I refuse to be re-abused. And I thank you so much for your attention, because this story is very difficult because it hasn't ended yet. But I'm alive and I'm well. And I have a lot more to give. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Janet. That was really, really powerful. Again, a lot more food for thought.